Hello, this is Stuart Nachbar with Educated Quest. Today, I'm going to talk about another school that is on a block plan. In fact, it celebrated its 50th anniversary on the block plan. Colorado College in beautiful Colorado Springs, Colorado. One would think that a school that has a beautiful campus setting and a beautiful downtown certified creative district next to it and a very intense academic environment would be a fairly selective school. And you'd be right. This is one of the finest and most selective and also very well endowed liberal arts colleges in the country. And with me today is Karen Kristof. She is Assistant Vice President and Dean of Admissions at Colorado College. Karen, thank you for joining me today.
Oh, Stuart, it's such a pleasure. I'm really excited to share some information and answer some questions. I'm really honored to be here.
Well, can you briefly, aside from we'll talk about the block plan in a few moments, but aside from the block plan, what makes Colorado College stand out from other schools?
Yeah, it's a great question. So I think that we talk about three things at CC that make us special: people, program, and place. So we'll set aside program because we'll talk about the block plan, but our people. I think it's a really wonderful, engaged community of students from all over the US and all over the world, and a faculty that is deeply committed to giving students a fantastic immersive education. And our place. I mean, I think that one of the things that I say to students right away is, this is not another liberal arts college in the Northeast or in California. Those are amazing, amazing places. But one of the things that I think makes us special within the liberal arts college landscape is our location in the Southwest, in the Rocky Mountains. And I think what's really cool is you have this really great, and I'm on campus today, so excited to be doing this from here, this beautiful campus with lots of green space and all the things that you would want. You could practically touch Pikes Peak to the west, and then you go less than a mile and you're in bustling downtown Colorado Springs, so you get a little bit of everything here. The Springs is about 400,000 people, the metropolitan area about 700,000, so I think that's a really cool feature of coming to Colorado and being a part of this kind of beautiful part of the country. And then we'll talk about the block plan, because I think that's a sort of huge piece of this too.
Do you ever hear, like, when you have students come, when you've had students visit, they said, oh, we were at this school and they were in an isolated part of Maine, or this one in an isolated part of flyover country, and then they come to you and like their mouth drops. Does that ever happen?
Yeah, it's a good question. You know, I think I've always felt over my time in this field that there's a right place for everybody. There's probably multiple right places for everyone. So I think there are definitely those students that like those sort of rural campuses where they exist, whether they're flyovers or on a coast. But I do think there's something special. There's not too many of us that can say that you both have the intimacy of a campus community and a campus that feels like there's a lot of green space and you get to, you know, at least see people's faces. And if you don't know everyone's name, you feel a part of this greater collective, and that you can have an urban center nearby. So, you know, I think students are looking for different things in the college process, and that's part of the fun and part of the challenge is like figuring out who you're going to be. But I do think it blows some people's minds to see that we have this outdoors and this mountain and this real sense of like connecting students to this beautiful natural world we're in, and yet you can go to downtown Colorado Springs and feel like you're in something that's a little bit more urban. So yeah, I think it ticks off a number of boxes for students, and that's really fun as they come and they begin to explore what that might look like for them.
Sticking with people for a few moments,
Yeah.
how many freshmen arrived this fall?
Yeah, so we, in a typical year, have about 600 first-year students, give or take, right? You know, enrollment is not science as much as we'd like to think we can get it down to the exact number. And we had a slow rollout for our first-year students, not unexpectedly because of COVID. We had about 100 students who decided they either were going to start coming next month in January or they were going to take a gap year. We've always been a place that's very affirmative about gap years, so we probably had more than the typical liberal arts college. But normally we'd have still about around 30 students. This year it was closer to 90 students that decided that they wanted to take a semester, a year off. So happy that we'll be able to have some of them starting in winter in January. And we've had a winter start program for a number of years. So it's not uncommon for us to have new students in January, even in pre and post COVID times. But that's sort of where we sit. We're at about 2,200 students overall. And typically we're looking at, between 550 and 600 students in the incoming class.
Did the college have to do things with density during the
Yeah,
fall, and does that
yeah.
continue in the spring, or are
Yeah,
most of the students able to return?
yeah. So at this point, we do have more than half of our students. I will say, because Colorado didn't experience COVID quite as hard as the coast did originally, we had all of our new students come back or arrive, and then we had a lot of upper class students who were working on theses or were working in residential life or were on our fall sports teams. And so when we had our first couple of cases, it was a little bit difficult, and we did a little bit of de-densifying. I mean, I think one of the things that's great about the block plan is you have these natural moments between classes where you could do some shifting. So students could say to us, hey, I want to be on campus for blocks 1 through 3, and then I'm going to take block 4 and do it remotely. And so we have some classes that are meeting in person, but we have a lot of classes that are meeting remotely. So that kind of hybrid model really works well. We also, students do 8 blocks a year. This year, we gave students the opportunity to think about a year from the start in September through next summer. So we're basically giving students 11 blocks. So if they just want to do their 8 blocks, they can start and stop, or wait and start a little bit later. So the way that the block plan gives you flexibility really made it easy for students to kind of decide how they wanted their year to look. And so we knew there would be some students that wouldn't be joining us until a little bit later in the fall semester, or students that might say, you know what, I'm going to go from January sort of through July.
So they
So
could
that was
start
really
their
nice to have
school
that
year at a
flexibility.
different time if they wanted to?
So say that again.
So they could start their school year at a different time. Let's say they wanted to start in block 2 instead of block 1, they could do that?
Yes, so first year students at least had to do, so we have the first 2 blocks for every first year student is our first year experience. And it's one of the ways that we immerse students. So if they weren't going to do it in Colorado Springs, which was fine, they still would have to do for our first year students those first 2 blocks. But then they could decide, for instance, like block 3 and 4 I want to take off, or I'm going to decide that I'm going to finish right before Thanksgiving, and I'm going to opt back in January. But for our returning students, they had the most flexibility because they've already done their first 2 blocks as a first year student. So a second year student or a junior or a senior could decide, hey, I want to start in January, or I only want to do 6 blocks this year because I've got some extra blocks from the year before. So it gave a lot of flexibility to our second, third, and fourth year students. But once a first year student committed to doing those first 2 blocks, then they could have a little bit more flexibility even in their first year.
I'm sure in admissions, you've seen a lot of people who took gap years, and
Mhm.
often they took gap years where they were somewhat adventurous
Yeah,
as to where they went.
yeah,
They might have done things on a tropical island, or an opposite, a very cold place, or a
yeah.
urban setting. Are blocks like that too? Can blocks be adventurous as well as
Yeah,
classrooms?
yeah. So, I mean, I think a non-COVID CC can very much look like that. That field study is an important part of the block structure. And if you think about it, so you're taking 1 class at a time as a CC student, and a CC faculty member is only teaching 1 class at a time. So if it makes sense for the geology class to be gone most days and off campus, that is possible to do. Or one very popular sociology class that we have, the globalization of immigration, takes students for part of the 3.5-week block to live on the Mexico border, and to really sort of explore immigration sort of up close. We also have a Southwest Studies program where students might spend, say, part of that block on a pueblo in New Mexico. So the opportunity to transplant a class from Colorado Springs to another location is in some ways only possible in a block, because you don't have to rush back to campus to get your other class. And if you're a faculty member, you don't have to rush back to campus to teach another class. So that very immersive, in-depth opportunity for a field study. We're doing field study a little bit differently. more kind of day trips, less transporting folks off campus for multiple days, but just trying to use sort of a local area. We've taken some of our big athletic buses that would normally accommodate, say, 60 or 70 people and de-densified those. So if your class is 15 or 16, which is the sort of typical size of a CC class, you could use one of our sort of fan buses, for instance, to be able to do some of that. So we've been, as many institutions have been, as creative as we can be while maintaining the health and well-being of our community.
If a student is in a major that favors travel, let's say it's a foreign language as an example, is that figured in the student's cost of attending the school over the course of a year?
So we do have some assistance for students who are doing, so study abroad does look a little differently here, in that students can do a semester or a year, or you could do, say, a block or two abroad.
Oh,
and so every student, as part of their fees, is allowed to do one of the blocks as sort of part of their tuition, do a block or two abroad as part of what they would normally pay to CC. And then, of course, if you're doing a semester or a year abroad, you would be paying your fees to Colorado College, and we would be helping you with some of that. And we do have some money set aside for students that might want to do a summer abroad or a January abroad. There's not too much happening outside the US at this point, but we certainly hope to resume some of that. We'll see how long into 2021 before we can do that. But at the moment, students are not studying overseas, but we hope to be able to increase some of that.
if they do a semester or a year, do they stay in one place or can they go to multiple places?
So a lot of the study abroad places that are blocks would only be, say, that sort of 3.5 weeks, or we've got 2 double block programs, one in China and one in Russia, where the intention is you get that 2 blocks plus we have these 4.5-day block breaks between blocks. So you can imagine that's more like 8-ish weeks. So, that it gets divided between Shanghai and Beijing, or St. Petersburg and Moscow. But let's say you are doing a year, you might combine 2 semester programs, right? So there are some programs that are regional. We're very open to students sort of exploring new sorts of programs, but if you tend to do a flip, it might be more on those kind of block programs, right? Where you're going to take 2 blocks out of your normal 8 and spend time sort of concentrated in that period.
Now, do some majors require like a capstone or a thesis at the
Yeah,
end?
so there's the thesis option exists, and a lot of students take advantage of it. And so in some majors that would be more or less required, and other majors there's a little bit more flexibility, but certainly the idea is that you're moving toward a culminating piece of work in that particular major, whatever that might look like, right? In the arts, it might look very different than, say, in chemistry or something like that. But that's our goal, is that we want students to be able to have some kind of a culmination, capstone, thesis, research project, whatever it might look like in that particular
And do
area.
they have one block to do that, or could they do that over more than one block?
Yeah, depends on the project. I'm aware, for instance, of a student who is in the sciences here who's doing a 2-block segment, and then I know some other students that are just doing a 1-block segment. So it sort of depends on, you can do a thesis block or a research project block, or it may be that you're spreading it out and not doing it sort of full time, or you might spread it out over 2 blocks, or you might have the opportunity to, we do have January blocks that are, that can sort of be added on in summer blocks. So you might, kind of, we're really students at our place. So you can jigger it, make it work sort of any way that you want in terms of the
And do
blocks.
internships occur as part of a block, or are they done outside of a block? Like someone might go to work for the mayor of Colorado Springs as a part-time
Right,
job and do a
right.
block in another class.
Right. So the thing that's cool about internships that can be done throughout the course of the year. So we certainly have students that go the more traditional route, which is the summer immersive internship, where you get to work for 6, 8, 10 weeks over the summertime, or 3 or 4 or 5 weeks in January. But I know a CC student who is actually very similar to that story. He has been working with the city council of Colorado Springs. And so what that particular student is doing, sort of an internship over the course of a much longer period of time in these block breaks that I mentioned. So a block is 3.5 weeks. And what's cool is you start and finish that class in that 3.5 weeks, and then you're done. You have done your exam, you've done your presentation, whatever that final sort of piece of assignment that you had to do for that class, write the paper, take the exam, is over, and then you get 4.5 days. And so that this student was able to be sort of more full-time. Every 3.5 weeks had 4.5 days that they could be sort of more full-time. So that makes the internship work really well, that you can continue the academic work and be doing, what happens on the block plan is classes meet from 9 to noon or 9 to 12:30, and then you basically have the afternoon sort of available to you. But also the pace is quick, right? So that, if you think about one class being 3 or 3.5 hours, students probably have 3 or 3.5 hours of homework, right? Because you're learning a subject that often goes 15 weeks, 14 or 15 weeks on a traditional academic calendar, and we're compressing it into a 3.5 week structure. So students have a lot more homework probably than if you divided, like the one class that you're taking out of 4 in a traditional semester, but it still gives students some time during their block. So students here talk about 4th week. So, blocks are 3.5 weeks. So by the time you get to week 4, it's kind of like finals, right? 4th week is like crunch time. You just got to get it done. So a lot of students will say, like, I'm happy to help you with this, but don't ask me 4th week, because 4th week, it's only half a week, but boy, that is the week. That is the big week. So this student probably doesn't do very much for their internship during 4th week, but then they have the 4.5 day block break. So, it's a, you feel like when there's a block break, there's almost like a collective exhale on campus, right? That students have worked really hard in those 3.5 weeks. And I love, as I meet CC alums, I love the stories they tell about how their professional lives have been so significantly influenced by the block structure that if someone at work or in graduate school says, here, Stuart, here's a ton of work, go forth and do it, they're like, I'm not going to worry about it. Like, I did organic chemistry in 3.5 weeks. I can do anything, right? So that sense of possibility, that sense of knowing how to meet complicated projects with tight deadlines, they're good at that after their first year at CC. So, yeah.
When students are in a block taking a class, when do they choose the class that will be their next block?
So students can plan pretty far ahead, actually. So you can plan much like you would for a semester, that you can be planning well ahead of the block, kind of thinking about your sort of semester or year. And then, there are times when students start in a block and realize, this is just not for me, or I had mono for the first 4 days of the block. I'm not going to be able to keep this block, and they might need to drop a block, right? So that does happen. But pretty much students are planning out through the year, and also looking at, for instance, what are, we have majors, right? So there are requirements for majors when I'm going to get this done, so that they're sitting with their advisors and really trying to think more than just blockly, that we even have that as a word here. Blockly is a chunk of time on the CC campus, but that they're thinking beyond blockly. They're thinking the semester, the year, the next year. So they are working, as many other students are on a traditional calendar, of sort of thinking about their, particularly once they've declared their major and know they're getting close, like, what do I need to do? How do I need to structure it? So,
what would you say happens to these students when after they've been in here a while? Do they go into the major they intended, or do they change their mind and maybe they graduate with that and another major, or that and several minors, or something totally different than they expected?
Yeah, I think it's the wide range, right? I think that makes us very much like the quintessential liberal arts college, where a lot of students come in, I think I might want to go in this direction, and they sort of do, but then they take a sharp left. Or they say, I don't really know what I want to do. And we really want to use those first 2 blocks, that first year, to really help students to be able to figure out what it is that sort of resonates with them, right? Many subjects that CC teaches, other colleges teach, are not subjects you even had in high school, right? Like, what does it mean to do Southwest Studies? What does it mean to do anthropology, right? Until you get into it and have that particular class. I think one of the other things a CC alum said to me recently was, one of the other things that she loved about the block plan is she said she waited until her final year to do things she thought she was really bad at, right? Like, I'm not good at this particular subject, so I know I should probably take a class in this, but I'm going to put it off. I'm going to put it off till I'm sort of done with my major. And one of those classes was studio art. And so she said, okay, I'm going to do it. I'm a senior. I want to do an art class at CC. And she said, one of the great things about the block plan is you sort of have to be an artist. Like, you are going to live and breathe art for 3.5 weeks. She said, I had that pencil in my hair for 3.5 weeks, right? I was an artist. I was drawing. I was, I had charcoal on my hands, right? She said that you really take on that persona, right? So I think lots of small liberal arts colleges are good at helping students, navigate where they were, where they're going to be. But I'd also make the argument that I think the block plan helps you see yourself in that space, even if you might say, oh, I'm a terrible artist, I'm a terrible chemist, don't ask me to do this, right? But then you're surrounded by people that are excited about it, and you literally get immersed in it. And that's, I don't know, I guess it's really cool. It's a really cool way to learn.
Well, if it's something that, let's say, is offered at a large university, like a introduction to chemistry, or biology or econ,
Yeah,
that at a very large school might be graded on a curve.
yeah,
And here you're in a small class, and science was your worst subject, and you were a social science major,
yeah,
and science was your worst subject, but you need a science to graduate.
yeah.
How were people choosing their blocks in that subject that they had always struggled with before they got
Yeah,
to Colorado
that's
College?
a good question. And I think, so, I would describe our requirements as more along the lines of distribution requirements, right? So that certain number outside of students' majors, certain number around particular themes. And so I think there's lots of ways to think about science. And for instance, science sometimes being the one, or math being the one that is often the Achilles heel, right? I think about one of our molecular biologists on the faculty, Olivia Hatton is her name. And, when you ask her how she teaches a chunk of molecular biology in a 3.5-week period, it is not how much can I cram into people's heads. It's how much can I get them to think like a scientist? How much can I get them to understand where the tools are that they can use? They don't have to memorize everything, right? But they have to understand what makes someone a scientist and understand sort of the underlying principles, right? And, high school is not fun for a lot of people, because often it's just about how much can you cram in and then how much can you put on the exam, right? And so I think one of the things that's always any college, and again, I might argue the block plan, right, really helps students to see themselves as not only mastering that subject, but meeting it in a different way, right? That it isn't just about memorizing formulas, it's about thinking like a scientist and using the tools that you have to help you grow as a scientist, and seeing the value of understanding things from a scientific lens. Or if you're a scientist, understanding things from a literary lens, right? So part of it is, I think, what professors are doing in terms of how they design their classes is really thinking about how they can meet this group of 16 students in a way that takes a lot of complicated material, make sure that students have the foundations and the basics, right? But also know how to be good researchers and think with that particular perspective and lens, and know where to find information, right? Like you may not be able to memorize thousands of chemical equations in an organic chemistry class, but will you know how to think like a chemist, and will you know where to find your answers? And my argument would be, yeah, because you are sort of very, very fully immersed in that for that 3.5 week period.
Well, it sounds to me like you'd need two ingredients. One, a really good teacher who
Mhm.
realizes that there are going to be people in the major or
Mhm.
intend to major, and then there are people who they're taking this to fulfill a requirement,
Yeah,
and they're
right.
and they're gonna have a more difficult time. And it also takes sort of a collaborative effort among the students,
Sure.
because
Mhm.
they know that there are some who are going to, who are going to breeze through it or enjoy it, and there are others who are going to struggle. And
Mhm.
it sounds like you have to select teachers for their ability to manage a classroom,
Mhm.
just like a good high school would select teachers
Mhm.
to manage a classroom.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. I mean, people that are good in their fields, but excited about sharing that journey, right? And immersing themselves for 3.5 weeks as a faculty member, right? Because you've got to love what you do to be that engaged with your students, right? To be that engaged in problem solving and helping them sort of meet that particular subject. So yeah, I'm not on the faculty hiring part of this enterprise at CC, but I can tell you the faculty that I've met have really impressed me with their dedication to students and their dedication to the sort of the work that they're doing, right?
Are prospective faculty asked to give a guest lecture to a block?
That's a good question. Certainly it's not been something that I've seen in my time at CC, but it's also very possible that it's happening outside of my universe in the admission office. But I think that when this decision was made 50 years ago to go to the block, it was at a time in the US, 1970, just before 1970, when lots of places were looking at like, how could we do this better? And there's this great story about just a couple of faculty that were literally sitting in a bar downtown having beers and saying like, how could we do this thing better? And what if we asked our students to just take one class at a time? And we got them really focused on that particular class at that particular time and gave them this really immersive experience. So I don't know. I mean, I'm not a faculty member, but I would think there would be a lot of advantages to being in a classroom of students that you get to know, even though it's only 3.5 weeks, but you get to know them very deeply in this kind of 3 hours a day, sort of intensive, immersive structure. So I even on Zoom, because I jumped in, this is probably, at least a month ago now, on some end of Block 2 first year class, and I was listening to some presentations, and this was a professor who teaches business and economics here, who was asking students to, the 2-semester first year sequence is called Money and Morality. And so it's about like how you think about economics, finance, money to solve compelling societal problems, right? And so I was listening to a couple of presentations, including one that that a first year student was giving about why it is that the meat industry uses so much water for us to sort of get the meat that we put on our dinner tables, and how you could get companies to use less water and be better stewards of a important natural resource like water, and what could be the economic incentives or disincentives, right? But if even on Zoom, I don't know, I just got this sense that there was this great rapport in this class, right? And it had to all happen on Zoom this fall for this particular class. And I just thought, well, this is just the kind of sort of connection that peers have with each other and that students have with their professor. So yeah, it's special.
You mentioned something earlier that this year there are 11 blocks.
Uh-huh.
Was there any changes in the number of courses that would be available, or were they spread out over the year?
Yeah, so there were some classes that were offered a little bit more frequently. Professors don't teach every block. Professors teach about half of the blocks in a sort of given year, or less, depending on sort of their own work and research. So we offered some more classes more frequently. So someone might be teaching, in 3 blocks the same subject. But it was kind of a mix of things. I mean, one of the things that's nice about the block plan is we can be fairly nimble in terms of, okay, it looks like this is going to be a very popular block, or we might need to offer it again because now we know. So our limit is if one professor is teaching a class, 16 is the absolute cap. And then it's 25 if 2 professors are co-teaching a class. And so you can sort of pivot a little bit if like block 1, you're teaching this particular class, and then block 8 or 9, we might need to offer it again. So, I mean, I think that's really been a nice part of that too. But no, we haven't hired a lot of new faculty. Some faculty are teaching a little bit more than they used to. Some popular classes are being offered a little bit more than they used to, but we have not, we will probably post-COVID go back to a more normal sort of block schedule.
In a pre-COVID and hopefully post-COVID environment, does everyone live on campus, or do people live off, other than for academic reasons like study abroad, study away?
Yeah. So at the moment, there's a 3-year living on campus requirement. We're contemplating actually moving that down to a 2-year living on campus requirement. Not that we don't have a robust residential experience, but because we actually we're in a neighborhood of Colorado Springs called the Old North End. And generally what happens is first-year students live in traditional dorms. Sophomores and juniors start migrating to apartment-style living on campus. And then by the time they get to junior year, they're sort of wild about living sort of in apartments, and there's a lot of places to rent within walking distance of the campus in this particular neighborhood. And downtown is close enough to sort of get to. So at the moment, that's sort of where we are on a sort of, you're required to live on campus for 3 years. It might change to 2 years. And students don't go far. Like, it is very much a residential community, but it might be it's a couple blocks to the east, or a couple blocks to the north, or a couple blocks to the south where they're living. So, so it gives students a lot of flexibility when it comes to that.
For students who are on campus, how did the dining experience change, and how did their extracurricular experiences change in
Yeah,
terms of clubs and
yeah.
organizations?
So what I would say is about half of our clubs and organizations figured out how to do some kind of a Zoom work, right? So that they kept students engaged through some kind of a Zoom environment, not the same, right? But even our Center for Community Engagement, which largely does a lot of placing students into the community to do service learning, to engage in important issues in the city. They were doing some things on Zoom. And in terms of dining, it's all been to go. And I think that's probably been the thing that's been the biggest challenge for students, right? This is same on lots of campuses, that students can go to the main dining hall. There is hot food. They can put together their own sort of styrofoam container of as much as they want, of many different kinds of things as they want, but that we can't have folks sort of eating indoors in our main dining hall. So that has been a challenge. So it's students will call it the main dining hall here is Rastal. So it's Rastal to go. So it's been all Rasty to go this year. But the winter is going to be a little bit more challenging. But I have to say, today it's in the mid 40s, and not a lot of people eating their entire meals outside, but people are gathering. Next week it's going to be in the 50s. So winter has these kind of peaks and valleys in Colorado, and so it's not a perfect system, but it's the best way to keep people safe, is to not have that kind of sort of congregate dining of sorts. But we hope as the vaccine rolls out that we can start returning to some of that. But basically it's Rastal to go at this point.
Now, admissions visits by prospective students and their parents, they're happening virtually this year?
They're happening virtually this year. The admission office has been closed since mid-March.
And have parents and prospective students asked you or your counselors things they would not ordinarily ask if there was no pandemic?
That's a good question. I think, not surprisingly, parents have asked a lot about health and safety questions, about how we're managing COVID, what we're doing for testing, what are the ways in which we're sort of trying to keep the community safe. So there's been a lot of questions about that. Some students have asked as well, but I think students are more interested in what is student life like, more like your questions around, are there still clubs as an organization? Are there still fun things to do? Can I still engage with my friends? So we've tried to organize students in pods, right? Okay, this is your pod. These are your 7 or 8 people that you're going to kind of sort of travel with. But yeah, so if there's questions about that, I mean, to be honest with you, I think the biggest challenge is, how do you get the CC vibe, so to speak, virtually, right? And I think our solution is try to put fewer of the talking heads from admission on camera and more of the students and professors on camera, right? So when we did a one summer virtual open house and did 2 fall open houses, and by far the most popular part of the program was not hearing from me. It was being in a mock class and imagining what it would be like to Steve Hayward, one of our creative writing professors. He even gave the students assignments that they could write to, they had this writing prompt at the end of the class, and they could write to him, and he'd give them feedback on it. And then if they applied to CC, he would add that feedback to their application, right? So it was trying to get a feel for what you would do when you were here. Like, that you would be able to sit in on a class, be able to wander around and see what it was like. So we did some live tours. We figured out how to get the iPads on the gimbal so that they didn't shake around too much as somebody was walking around campus. But so we tried our best to emulate those aspects of a visit that are much more spontaneous and real and less talking heads, so to speak. So we hope to continue that for our admitted students. And then for the juniors, I mean, they are, I'm sure, we know they have started exploring. So trying to offer as many real moments, as real as you can get in a virtual environment. but putting our people in front of the camera, that's the most important thing.
Are freshmen in pods as well as upper-class students?
Yeah, so we have the big three dorms. So there's about 3 dorms where most of our first-year students live, and so they have been organized as sort of small pods. So it might be that you have a roommate, and that person's obviously in your pod, but it might be the 3 or 4 people that are sort of on the hall with you, or 3 or 4 people that you have a sort of other things in common with. But yeah, so we have, and when I say big, we're talking 100, 120 students in those particular big 3, as we call them, dorms. And we've got first-year students in other situations, maybe 150, sort of depending on the dorm. So, but yeah, those students are sort of organized in pods. So people are reminded to kind of stay in their pods. Maybe they go with their pod to go get food, right? And we're doing a lot of random testing, right? So, and then when something comes up, if in fact, and we're doing a lot of that rapid testing, that kind of 20-minute testing. And if something comes up, trying not to quarantine the entire dorm, but to sort of isolate that particular pod. I mean, that's where the pods really come in handy. You don't have to tell 150 people they're stuck in their rooms, but that there might be 7 or 8 people that need to be, spend 7 or 10 days sort of away from as many people as possible.
Were the upper-class students, when they knew that there would be pods, and let's say they were living at home, beforehand, were they allowed to choose who would be in their pod with them because they
So for
already had
most
been
of,
there a year?
yeah, most of the upper class students, were either living in apartments, so those became sort of pods. Like, so if you're living in one of the CC apartments, those are your people. That's your pod very naturally because you're living in the same structure together. And what was also interesting is that some of our students, when they were in a position where there were more cases on campus, actually kind of organized themselves in pods in terms of apartments that they were renting. Like a friend had an apartment and they were sort of kind of invited to join. So our upper class students were a little bit more, I think, familiar with the sort of not being in the big dorm, had already migrated toward some of our smaller houses and some of our apartments. So those pods kind of naturally came together a little bit more, organically, because they were already, 7 or 8 of them were already sort of essentially living together, sharing a living room space or sharing a kitchen, something like that.
One thing that I've often heard with other colleges is there's concern about students living in the community, students going into the community, and then students coming on campus from the community.
Mm-hmm.
Were there any of those concerns at CC over the
That's
last?
interesting. Yeah. So we are not the only college game in town in the Springs, right? The Air Force Academy is here. There's the University of Colorado campus here. There's a couple of other higher education institutions here. So this is a city that likes its college students, I would say, because they bring a lot to sort of the so it's education is a business in Colorado Springs. So I didn't hear that, actually. I mean, I think that the sense that I have, for instance, of our downtown merchants is that they are really eager to have our students come and go get takeout or go visit the store or whatever it might be, right? So I think it was less about students coming from other places and bringing COVID, right, as much as it was trying to see if they could figure out ways to continue to engage with students and be able to sell their products and keep their businesses running. There actually, I just read in the local paper that there were 3 new businesses that started in 2020 downtown, which is kind of hard to imagine, right? That you'd be starting a business. And it's interesting that 2 of them were like live performance venues. And so they haven't been able to do a lot except over Zoom, but they've been able to, sort of attract enough Zoom business. And then the city just built some, I don't know if you're familiar, you and your listeners are familiar with this term, parklets. So basically taking some parking spaces, right, and turning them into little huts of sorts, right? So they've just installed some parklets downtown, and we'll see how the winter is, right? I mean, the parklets are working well, and the first night that the parklets were put out, the local news it was snowing that evening, not very hard, but maybe an inch of snow or something. And there were folks out in the parklets eating, which I was like, not sure that I'd be out there eating with my mittens and scarves and hats, but people are, we've got a wide range of cuisines in town, but mostly we're doing takeout, right? There's no indoor dining in Colorado at the moment in the entire state. So I think they're trying to be creative, and they've got a captive audience here of students that are that are eager to try their food and try the things that they're selling. So they're being creative. That's
Well,
as every city is being creative, right?
that leads me to a question, because you have students coming from all over the world, and not all of them come from places that have cold weather. Have you run into students who said, "Oh my God, I didn't have a winter coat, or I didn't bring enough sweaters, or I
Yeah.
didn't bring enough for this weather"? Has that?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I got to say, one of the things that I would say about Colorado, having lived in the Midwest and in New England, is that Colorado is very much the layering kind of place, right? Because this morning it was 15 when I came to work, and this afternoon when I leave, it's going to be close to 40, right? So I needed to have a couple of layers. So yeah, I mean, students, we have lots of ways that we can help, particularly international students or students who come from warmer climates, to get them get them the sort of winter gear that they need. Someone was making a comparison between Vermont and Colorado. Vermont also a place where a lot of people ski. That if you want to ski in the sunshine, you come to Colorado. Which is to say, I mean, one of the things we love to brag about is that there's 300 days of sunshine here. So even on the coldest day, you still see the sun, and we're at 6,000 feet. So the sun feels a little warmer in December than it does in other places that I've lived. So yeah, but we're very much accustomed to students from all over everywhere and can help them get what they need. And if we have students who are receiving a lot of financial aid, we can be able to offer them some assistance to be able to buy warm coats and boots and things like that. We definitely get snow here. It definitely is cold here, but we certainly know how to help those students. But I gotta say, you gotta love the sunshine here, that's for sure.
I've visited colleges in Vermont, and one thing I've noticed is Vermonters, whether they are involved with the college or not, tend to be pretty hearty eaters.
Oh,
Is that the same case with Coloradans, or Colorado
I
college students as they become they become Coloradans?
yeah, I don't know. I think Coloradans go in the opposite direction, to be honest with you, which is like everybody everybody bikes and hikes and is active, and everyone's, you have this, when you become a Coloradan, you are familiar with this term called 14ers. And these are mountains that are 14,000 feet or higher. We have 58 of them in Colorado. So there are literally some people that have, like, up in their office or at their home, like a little chart. How many 14ers have you climbed, right? Like, so I climbed this one, and some 14ers are harder than other 14ers, right? But for many Coloradans, it's all about getting out there into the outdoors. And so I think if there's been one thing that's been good for all of our collective mental health during COVID, is that whether you're someone who still, my boss who lives 5 blocks away, he still cycles to the office every day, even if it's cold. We have those little electronic assist bikes that you can get pretty cheap downtown to rent for the day if you just want to tootle around town, but you don't want to use all of your own steam. But no, this is a real outdoor haven, I would say. People like to be outdoors, people like to be active. So if they're hearty eaters, they're definitely burning the calories.
What would you say are the characteristics of a student who is most likely to succeed at Colorado College versus other schools around the U.S. or
Yeah,
elsewhere that they might be thinking about?
yeah, it's a good question. And I guess one of the things I would say in response to that initially is I think more students would like the block plan than they realize, right? And so that would be one thing that I would say, that there isn't a block plan personality, right? But I do think that students who are willing to be a little bit adventurous, are willing to get excited about a particular class over a 3.5-week period. Often we hear from students that say things like, I love to be able to do my math homework, but then I have to put that down to do my English homework, and how fun it would be just to be able to do my math homework, right? So I think those are the kinds of students that do well on the block plan. I do think it's a place that people like to be outdoors, but you don't have to be outdoorsy, right? You don't have to know how to ski. to come to Colorado. So we also try to, we have this huge outdoor education program where we try to introduce, we have everything from those who have hiked mountains before to those who don't really like to walk from point A to point B, and we will teach them how to hike, right? We'll rent equipment for them, right? So I think that every time I want to go down a path to say, well, you should be risk-taking and adventurous and like to be outdoors and like to think about your academics in 3.5-week chunks, I think that's all true, but I think CC is a place of a lot of diverse individuals, right? We have 17 intercollegiate sports, 2 Division I sports. So our men's hockey team is like completely amazing, right? Division I. Our women's Division I soccer team, also completely amazing, right? And then we have people that, don't really do this sort of athletics thing, right? So there are a lot of different people that I think populate CC, but I think that sense of trying something new, appreciating our location on the Rocky Mountain West, sort of getting excited about their learning, and students that like to manage a lot of complicated work in a short period of time and build those particular skills. So yeah, I think it's a really special place.
Are they looking at mainly liberal arts schools?
Yeah, I mean, we've been working really hard at getting more students from Colorado, and so our Coloradans are looking at lots of different schools, and we're also fighting with UC Boulder for students, or the University of Denver for students. But yeah, lots of other liberal arts colleges that our students are interested in. Our overlap schools are all kinds of different liberal arts colleges, some bigger places. And to have students from everywhere, a lot of it is, a lot of our students that live in this region of the world, a lot of it is, one of the things they've done to attract more Colorado students is try to make it affordable to be a Coloradan, to be able to go to school in your neighborhood for what it would cost you to go to, say, UC Boulder, or one of the other sort of state university systems. So we've tried to make our Coloradans feel like this could be a really special place that's not that far away from home. Might be a couple hours drive, might be down the street. We released our early action decisions yesterday, and there were a couple of us that are in the office today talking about our local students, many of whom had ties to Colorado College or went to the same daycares together, and were like texting each other last night, I got in, right? So, as much as this is a local place, it's also a very national, international place. So.
Is there, last question, is
Yeah.
there optimism on campus and within your campus community that life is going to become closer to what it was before the pandemic?
Yeah, I think so. And one evidence that I'll give of that is there is a group of mostly alums and some students that do a holiday video, right? And they do it with that these are a few of my favorite things, right? What is that song from Sound of Music? I can't remember now. What was it? Raindrops on Roses, Whiskers on Kittens, right? And so this has been a tradition for a number of years to do these are my favorite things. And the video was just released a couple days ago, and they talked about the favorite things they're missing. And then they ended with the favorite things they know will be coming back, right? That CC won't change, the institution won't change, the people won't change. So I would say yes. I think that there's certainly optimism, but there's also this sort of sense of knowing this place and knowing themselves and being excited about what's possible. So I don't know. I mean, this is also an age group that just is very optimistic about making a difference in the world and being committed to thinking about important issues and galvanizing others for change. So our students have been involved in looking at questions around COVID, like what things will look like after COVID, or what particular industries will look like, or, some of our scientists that have been working on, how do you think about a vaccine? How do you think about a pandemic? How does this compare to the Spanish flu, right? This is, as an educational institution, you can also use something like a global pandemic as a real teachable moment too, right? And so I think we've taken advantage of those opportunities. But I mean, it's a very sweet video that your listeners could find on our website really easily. But I loved how it was both realistic about, things that you can't do and things that you can do, and that we will be back to sort of a CC that is more familiar and more like what we want it to be. And we'll be patient. We'll try our best to sort of stay dedicated to that mission between now and then.
Karen, thank you for spending time with me today,
Yeah, my pleasure.
telling
Thanks
me
for the
about Colorado
opportunity.
College.
Yeah, thanks.